What is your emotional state like? Yeah, that's a weird way to lead into this morning, isn't it? But some of us experience emotions externally and internally more intensely, it seems, than people around us. And we're never quite sure what to do with that. And often the people around us aren't quite sure what to do with us. We're going to talk about that a little bit today and see if we can demystify some things, clarify some things, take away some stigmas, or just find out that we may be one of those people who is highly sensitive. So put on the brakes, grab a cup of coffee, whatever you like to drink, and join the conversation because it is time for Coffee Breaks with Steve. Do you notice that I'm not sitting in my usual area and I'm using my travel cup? That's because I'm on the road again this week. I'm actually in Seattle, Washington, and doing a variety of things here this weekend, but we'll talk about that in a few minutes as well. Before we do, I want to introduce and bring on my co-host for this Saturday, someone who has joined us on Coffee Breaks with Steve in the past as a co-host and whose comments you often see in the chat. So without any further delays, let's bring Kim Baker into the conversation. Hey, Kim.
Hi.
Wait, who's that with you?
This is Sriracha.
Who definitely also wants to co-host today.
He's a big photo bomber. She will not be the first and she will not be the last.
Good. That's the way we like it. So, Kim, thanks for joining us again. And, one of the things that I typically do when I have guests or even co-hosts join is give a little intro. And in your case, I think people already have a pretty good idea who you are.
Mhm.
But if I were going to say, well, Kim, I need a little brief bio and something to talk about to introduce you, what would I be saying about Kim Baker?
I'm a neurodivergent, semi-eccentric, cat-loving, debatably crazy woman. Currently residing in the Midwest.
I think all of that's relevant. But beyond that, you're also a person who has a lot of interest in and brings up a lot of great discussion around things. You mentioned being neurodivergent. You were on here before several months ago, and we talked about synesthesia, which is something that you have and experience and not only deal with, but embrace. And I think it's important for people to know that you're a person who looks at things like neurodivergence, which we're not going to get into all the definitions of, but you don't look at things like that as being conditions or stigmas. You consider the things that many people look at as being non-typical neurodivergent types of situations as just being that's who we are.
It's who we are, and they tend to actually be really useful tools, especially in
Yeah.
this day and age where we're sort of conditioned that sensitivity is wrong and it's bad and there's something wrong with you if you're sensitive. But in reality, when you hear an interview of someone who escaped a serial killer or a bad situation, a lot of what they say is, my gut was telling me this, and I have this weird feeling, and I knew I shouldn't open the door. I can't explain why. Well, those are those little spidey senses, those sensitivities that a lot of times we're taught not to listen to. But in reality, again, they can be used as a very good intrinsic tool in our daily lives.
Yeah. And again, we don't have to go into detail, but you've talked in the past about how you utilize your synesthesia in life situations and work situations in a variety of areas. So that's pretty cool. Well, good. We're going to get into some things here in a few minutes, but the first thing I wanted to do was share some sweet and savory. So we'll pull up, and by the way, I should say hi to a few people who are on here because Shalane has signed in. She mentioned that she's a little bit headachy this morning, so she may just listen. That's fine, Shalane. Glad that you're here. You do what you feel up to doing. Kathy Garlick is here. Carla Venturi is here. Rick is here. All right. Hello, everybody. Let's bring up the charcuterie board.
Charcuterie.
Charcuterie board for our sweet and savory this morning. And, this was something that popped up. I try to pay attention throughout the week. We have so much news that pops up, Kim, that can be so negative and can draw us down. And I like to look for upbeat news stories. And I typically find several of them, but this was one that hit just a couple of days ago. And it was actually a follow-up on something that had been in the upbeat news recently. I love the comments, by the way, that you're making in the chat. Rather than saying things out loud, you're just sticking them in the chat. Hopefully that's prompting some other people to make comments too. And that is, by the way, if you are joining us live, do make sure you say hi, participate in the conversation. And if you tune in later on to watch this in its recorded format, you're still welcome to join in the conversation and add to the chat. This story was one, and I've got a video I'm going to play here in a minute, but this story, just a little introduction, came about actually on Memorial Day. A former news reporter in the New Orleans area was just out and about, and she was at her local Winn-Dixie grocery store, and she ran across this gentleman, older gentleman, who was just gathering the shopping carts and getting them back into the store from the parking lot. And she just started asking him some questions, struck up a conversation, found out he's a 90-year-old Air Force veteran who's working at this store because he still needed to make ends meet and have enough money coming in to put food on the table. And that really touched her. And she actually went to her old news station that she had worked at. She videotaped, got some videotape, edited it, hang on.
Everybody drink.
Thank you. I said charcuterie and I can't say edited. She edited the video, got it to the producers that she had worked with, and they ran this story, and she set up a GoFundMe for this guy, trying to raise just a little bit of money to help him make ends meet. And I'm just going to play the video that was the follow-up story to this. They ran the original story, and then after they'd seen some results from the GoFundMe, they ran a follow-up story. And here it is.
Those are the ones I wish to thank very, very much.
Earlier this week, we told you about a 90-year-old veteran pushing shopping carts to make ends meet.
Well, now he's thanking thousands across the country who raised money to help him retire.
Amelia Strahan brings us the surprising way he plans to spend his golden years.
Well, they only require you to push 4 at a time, but that's too slow.
If you ask Dylan McCormick what gets him out of bed every morning,
I enjoy working Winn-Dixie.
he'll tell you this.
I get to talk to more people, try to be nice to them or polite to them, really.
For over 2 decades, he's been greeting customers in Metairie with a shopping cart and a smile.
It's best to let them know that they're shopping at a place that I enjoy working for.
For the 90-year-old veteran, it's a job he relies on to put food on his table. But that changed when he ran into former WWL Louisiana anchor Karen Swinson, coincidentally on Memorial Day.
When you're working on Memorial Day, Mass, why? And I'm not sure if you can make out the words, but they were two, to eat.
That night, she decided to help.
I really believed that people would rally for him. I knew New Orleans and Louisiana would, so I was elated. I think for so many people, this has just confirmed our belief in humanity.
In under 24 hours, the GoFundMe had surpassed its goal of $200,000, enough for McCormick to put his days of pushing shopping carts behind him. But he says that he has other plans.
Yeah, he told me I can still work here. That was the most important thing, because I'd like to stay busy.
And management says he'll always have a place in the Winn-Dixie family.
He loves it. This is what he loves to do, and he's welcome here as long as he wants to stay here.
So just to be clear, your plans are to keep working here for a while?
As long as I'm breathing.
But for now, McCormick will keep greeting you with a shopping cart and a smile. In Jefferson Parish, Amelia Strahan, WWL Louisiana.
McCormick's story touched hearts all over the world. More than 5,000 people donated to his retirement fund.
It certainly was.
Isn't that great? I love that. I love stories like this, where I think there are just several elements to this story that touch me. Number one, I'm always a big supporter of the military and of veterans, and to think that this is a gentleman who served our country, and yet he's still having to work into his 90s to make ends meet. But his attitude about it, no animosity, no bitterness, no regrets. He loves doing what he's doing and having the opportunity to be out there with people. And I think that's probably part of what's keeping him going and keeping him young. So I just thought that was a cool story. So what else?
He seems to have found a purpose from it. It gets him out of the house, it keeps him fit and active, and it gives him a reason to get up every day, which is something my grandfather struggled with finding.
I think that's right. You know, my dad lived into his 90s, and part of what we saw with him, in fact, I think my dad got busier and started taking on more activities and being more active in the community after he retired from his job. And you know, I think that part of the reason that he stayed active, and he started to have some physical issues that slowed him down in the last few years of his life, but mentally he was still sharp, and he was still as active as he could be. And a lot of that, I think, was just the fact that, number one, he found ways to stay active, and number two, he found ways to do things where he was still interacting with people. And so often, I think that's part of what makes a big difference. I'm hopeful that I'll continue to do that. Who knows? Maybe I'll be doing, you know, like Geritol breaks with Steve by the time I'm 90 or something. Who knows? Anyway, I just wanted to quickly look to see some good comments out there. Keep them coming, guys. There was one birthday that I had on my list this week. Nilu Nouri. Nilu was a coworker of mine several years ago in the nonprofit world. And then Nilu was actually one of the very first guests on Coffee Breaks with Steve, because when we first started this, it was just me rambling nonstop, sometimes without pausing for breath for 30 minutes straight. And Nilu may have been the first person that, she was either the first or second guest who ever came on the show. And it was because during COVID, her two sons were reaching an age, high school, and then getting ready to head off to college. And she actually was coming up with various recipes that she could do during COVID, and wanted to pass them on to her sons as easy and convenient recipes that they could continue to carry forward. She ended up publishing the book that was this recipe book, and came on Coffee Breaks to talk about it. So for that, and also just because she is still a dear friend, happy birthday to Nilu. Hope you're doing well, and hope that your family's doing great as well. And then this I'm sharing for a couple of reasons. Number one, this is, I think the formal reference to this relationship is that Bella is my first cousin once removed. She is my cousin Lisa's daughter. And Bella just this past week graduated from high school here in Seattle. And why are we in Seattle? Well, this afternoon is a graduation party at my cousin Lisa and her husband Darren's house for Bella. And I'm here with my daughter Carissa and my grandsons Remy and Jameson. And we're going to go attend the party, celebrate with Bella, and give Remy and Jameson, through that as well, an opportunity to meet some family they've never met. And who knows when they'll get the opportunity again. So congratulations to Bella, and I'm really looking forward to this afternoon. And this is just something I like to throw out there. Do you have a special day this week that I missed because it wasn't on? Kim, any of your cats have birthdays this week?
Chorizo's is coming up, as Petco, Chewy, and every single other possible pet outlet reminded me of. He's going to be 14 this summer.
Wow. And have you had him since he was a kitten?
He ran into my garage when he was about maybe 4 or 5 weeks old and ate a whole chicken breast by himself. And so at that point, he became
He
mine.
just became family at that point. Well, that is cool. If anybody out there has a special day this week, you can stick it in the chat right now. I'm looking very quickly to see. And which date? Do you know exactly which date is Chorizo's birthday?
I
Or
want
which one you celebrate? What day you celebrate it?
I actually celebrate August 1st
Mm-hmm.
because he was so young, and I found him in the first week of September, I think.
Yeah.
But we kind of celebrate all summer.
So it's also going to ask you, do you with your cats, do you kind of do it like the royal family in England does, where there's like, regardless of when the birthdays are, you just pick a date and that's the date, that's the cat birthday celebration date, or do they each have separate
Oh, they have separate
celebrations?
ones.
Okay.
They do. I mean, everyone gets treats equally.
Sure.
And
I
they
mean,
develop with wet food.
it's the party.
hmm
That makes sense. I
More
like
parties
that.
all year.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Sorry, just clearing some notes out of my way here. It's always interesting when I'm on the road because I'm still using multiple monitors, but they're portable monitors and I'm set up differently. And so sometimes I'm hunting for things here. If you have a special day coming up sometime later in the summer, like August 1st, which actually my sister Carla's birthday is on August 1st as well. But if you have a special day coming up this week, put it in the chat. If it's coming up in the next few weeks and you want to make sure that we celebrate and acknowledge, send the email to cbwsteve@comcast.net and we will make sure that we celebrate with you. All right, Kim, I think we have waited long enough to talk about this. And you brought this up to me a few weeks ago as something worth talking about. It was something you had run across. And I'm going to let you talk about how you became familiar with this concept, but it's HSP, highly sensitive persons. And, you know, it sounds like some kind of a weird syndrome.
It sure does. Like maybe ESP or like some alien.
Yeah, like so
homeostatic.
let's talk about what highly sensitive HSP is really about, how it came about to kind of be introduced, and who might be experiencing this.
So a ton of people. I first got exposed to it a couple years ago. Before I left California, one of my coworkers was she had postpartum and her emotions were kind of everywhere. And her husband doesn't necessarily have the same level of empathy as she does. So she started thinking, oh my gosh, something's wrong with me. And she started researching and found a book called Highly Sensitive People. And she asked me to read it with her. And I got the book, but I didn't quite read it. But she did. And she's like, oh my gosh, this is totally me. It explains everything. And so fast forward to like 2 or 3 weeks ago, I found a documentary on highly sensitive people on, I think, Amazon Prime. And it goes into how highly sensitive people just experience the world a little bit differently than average. But it's not considered a disorder because an estimated 15 to 20% of the world population has this. So it's actually considered a personality trait because such a large population subset can identify with it, which is really cool. Because, I mean, that just goes to show you that just because you're neurodivergent or have like something that in your friend group or your immediate social group consider unusual, doesn't actually mean that you're necessarily unusual, and it doesn't mean anything's wrong with you. So for myself, I have always been really sensitive, like with synesthesia, colors, textures, sounds. I have misophonia. So if you chew gum near me, depending on how you chew it, I might want to punch you in the face. I might want to just run away. Hopefully it's the latter. And so, you know, obviously I'm like, okay, well, I'm neurodivergent, but what else is wrong with me? Because when I experience an irritation, for me, it's like 0 to 90. And I'm an all or nothing person. So whereas a colleague might experience the same thing and be like, oh, that was really annoying, I will be like, no, the dumpster is on fire and I'm going to stir the pot right now because I am so upset about this. Well, it turns out that's something that could be considered highly sensitive people. You experience your emotions more deeply and you experience the emotions of those around you more deeply. So the term was actually coined by Elaine Aron, And she thinks that, like in her theory, HSPs are a population subset who have high sensory processing sensitivity, where you can experience external sensory like sound, touch, very, very, very deeply, or you can experience internal sensitivity. Like, again, your emotions, where one person might be minorly irritated with something, and to you, it's like the end of the world. Some people confuse that with things like, I think one of them is explosive personality disorder, where all of a sudden you're really angry from like a minor trigger. That's actually totally different. That is considered more of a mental health issue that does need to be addressed. But with highly sensitive people, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to respond inappropriately. I think that's the biggest difference, is that your responses, as my therapist has confirmed, are completely rational and completely appropriate to the circumstances. But you and those around you might think that you're overreacting a little bit, when really it's just the way that your mind and body process the stimulation around you.
I think one of the things to think about here is, and by the way, I didn't post a link. You can go in, because not everybody necessarily wants to go in on Amazon. It is available at Amazon.com, but the title and the author are in the chat. You can find it on Amazon.com by searching for that. You can probably find it in a number of other bookstores, and we will also get the link to the documentary and make that available. When we talk about highly sensitive persons, you mentioned it's a personality trait. It's not a disorder. Is this something that experts say is hereditary? Like, if I have HSP, is it possible that my kids are going to have HSP? Is it more of a nature or nurture type of personality trait? And how much of it, I mean, I think about the fact, Kim, that especially if I'm a highly sensitive person and I'm exhibiting that, and my kids are growing up in that environment, they're going to be exposed to that, and they may, by environment, by exposure, take on certain characteristics of that as well, whether that's a natural part, because we do know that about personality, is that some of it is inborn and some of it is based on things that we're exposed to.
Yes, and that's actually a really good question. A lot of people believe that it could be genetic, because really, if you think about it, it's like a neurological and physiological response to the stimuli that you're experiencing, which makes sense. It could be genetically inherited. A lot of people also think it can be developed, especially if you are a child or you are young and you experience a significantly traumatic event. Then it's possible, if you're a child and something happens in front of you that you witness, that could sort of mold how you view the world around you. It could make you more sensitive to other things. Like, if you see a movie that's violent after experiencing violence, you may be more sensitive to it than if you hadn't seen the violence firsthand and it was more like away from your experiences. Also, sorry, the cat, this is Tapatio.
Hi, Tapatio.
He's the youngest. He's still experiencing true troublemaking. He's learning from the best.
That's good. And learning from the best being your other cats or you?
Both. I mean, I taught them everything I know.
That's good. Anyway, yes. So exposure can be a factor as well.
It sure can. Yeah. And
because we know that about personality traits. I mean, the personality traits, psychologists, other experts, sociologists, and others talk about the fact that our personality can come from different elements, both the nature and the nurture elements of life.
And it can also be cultural, because in some cultures, sensitivity is viewed as very useful and helpful of a tool. They like sensitivity, empathy, family situations. In former Native American culture, you used to live under one roof and you took care of each other. You take care of your elders in a lot of different cultures because you have that empathy to nurture. But in other cultures, sensitivity is seen as a weakness.
Right.
And there, people may be trained to not be as sensitive, and it won't be as valued, which means it could potentially be bred out genetically, but it could also be environmentally removed and undervalued.
One of the things that we've often referred to when we're referring to particularly our kids or grandkids, and they seem to be more, you mentioned empathy as one factor, but just tend to experience what we would call big feelings,
Mhm.
big feelings. And I think it's also important, just like with any other neurodivergent aspect of what might be a part of us, is that not everybody who experiences things empathetically or who has big feelings at times is necessarily someone whose personality carries that highly sensitive person's
Mhm.
trait.
Mhm.
We all go through different times where we may have big feelings, or
Yep.
we may react seasonally or circumstantially. We may tend to go through a stronger, more intense emotions. And this is more something that if somebody is a highly sensitive person, they're more likely that it's more likely to be something that they experience throughout the various aspects of life in different ways, positive
Mhm.
and negative potentially.
Yep. And in the documentary, they interview Alanis Morissette. She's sort of the star, and they talk about how her sensitivity really influenced and impacted her songs, but also her audiences. They were so relatable to
Wow.
people, but also how she was, if she got overwhelmed, she had to find coping mechanisms. If she were overwhelmed on stage or afterwards, or, and then they discussed her childhood, and her parents at one point told her, "We just didn't know what to do with you," because they
Yeah.
didn't understand where these big feelings and big emotions were coming from. And it could be something as simple as there's a loud noise, and where, your neurotypical or average anticipated response of a child is, "Oh, that's really annoying," or, maybe covering their ears. But for someone who's highly sensitive, it could be physically painful.
Yeah.
And that can be mistaken very often, actually, for autism spectrum disorder.
Right.
And it can also be mistaken for introversion. And while 70% of HSPs identify as an introvert, there's still at least 30% that are extroverts. They love being in social situations, they recharge around people, but certain triggers and certain sensory stimuli just bring about a maybe deeper or larger response. And there are pros and cons to that. A lot of cons are that some social situations could be difficult. Now, whereas with autism spectrum disorder, you may react to the stimuli inappropriately. Whereas, like, you start yelling to counteract the sound you hear, or
Mhm.
your neurological response is atypical. Your neurological response is telling your body that you're in danger or something's wrong or something hurts, when actually it doesn't, but that's how their brain is mistaking it. Whereas with highly sensitive people, their brain is gauging the situation properly, but again, their response is just a little more heightened. So there are some ways that it can be mistaken for other things. But again, that's one reason it's not considered a disorder so much as a personality trait, because your body and your mind are still reacting appropriately. So some of the cons are, you may be more disturbed by violence. So, like, for me, I don't like watching horror movies. Some people are fine with it, but for me, I think because I'm highly sensitive, I can empathize with the characters. I don't want to watch someone get torn apart by a chainsaw. And then you can also have, like, tensions, or you can feel overwhelmed, like Alanis Morissette talks about. You can feel very overwhelmed with what other people may consider a very simple situation, and you
Yeah.
could have trouble adapting to new circumstances. Now, whereas with autism spectrum disorder, you might be physically and emotionally incapable of adapting. HSPs are capable. It'll just take a little more effort, and you may need to have some coping mechanisms. You may need to dim the lights in your office or have earplugs at a concert, whereas some people don't. But a lot of the pros, I love the pros so much.
Yeah. Let's talk
So,
about that.
a lot of people consider HSPs as more creative, and some HSPs have been known to have synesthesia, which is also a neurodivergent trait known for mostly creative people having. You can have richer personal relationships because you experience the depth of your friendships and the love in those friendships a lot more deeply. You can have greater appreciation for beauty. Things are more exciting. Like, for me, I am very easily amused. I am very rarely bored because you can find joy in anything if you open up your mind to it and just, look for it. Oh my gosh, that candle smells so good. That just made my day. So there are definitely pros to it. And a lot of people too find a lot deeper relationships with music and human connection. So whereas Some people, they listen to music and have it in the background. HSPs might listen to it and find it very soothing and healing, and they might really relate to it in ways that your average neurotypical person might not.
In talking about various neurodivergent situations, HSP, synesthesia, autism spectrum, OCD, ADHD, and all the other acronyms and initials that we have out there for these various situations, some of these things and conditions and traits and the variety of other neurodivergent circumstances that affect people's lives can be mistaken for each other. They can also overlap.
Yep.
And we've talked about this before, and I think it's interesting to think about it. I'm sure there are studies on this. I'm sure there are professional white papers on this, that we still we're classifying things based on our understanding, our research, our ability to put some kind of, I almost hate to use the word labels, but we have to somehow classify and label various conditions and traits in order to help understand how they manifest, what resources or coping mechanisms or other things may be useful, and even to better understand those classifications. I mean, what is now included in autism spectrum disorder has changed over the last decade or two, and continues
and now that's
to.
A spectrum. It's not just
right.
one
It's not
group
just
of
that's
traits.
right.
There's a whole spectrum to it.
And and we've even separated out now. For a long time, Asperger's was incorporated into autism spectrum disorder as part of that spectrum, as another manifestation. And now the experts are saying, well, actually, it's a different thing, really. And there can be overlaps. And I mean, you can have synesthesia and be on the autism spectrum disorder, be in that spectrum, and have ADHD. And I mean, these things, sometimes one situation can have manifestations of others because they are all neurodivergent. And so your own neurological system, your own personality, your own level of whatever you have, it can be tough to classify, and it can also cause people sometimes to label themselves, which can add to the stigmas. And so I think it's important to understand, how do we learn more? What are some of the things that you suggest in terms of better understanding, and how do we cope with our own situations? Let's say we do identify as being a highly sensitive person. How do we clarify that for ourselves, and how do we cope with it and manage it? And if we see it in someone close to us, a family member, someone else close, how do we better relate to them?
And I love that people are actually studying this and learning about it instead of just brushing it off or putting it in a box to lock up and say, oh no, you're doing it wrong. Because for me, I thought something was wrong with me for a very long time. I'm light sensitive, I'm sound sensitive. So for me at the office, they have these little strips of, mine looks like the sky, of fabric, and they're magnetized. So you can put them over your standard fluorescent light fixtures and it'll help filter the light. So if you have those glaring fluorescents that bother you, you can do that. Or if someone in your office is really sensitive to the office lighting, maybe you could consider getting those for that office space that they're in the most and help them cope. Or if you see a child having a tantrum, of course, it could absolutely be a normal tantrum. It could be a behavioral issue, but it helps when parents start to understand that there may be a different trigger. So instead of just assuming the kid's upset because they're overwhelmed by being in a grocery store, okay, well, what exactly was the trigger? Communicate with your child. And if they're pre-verbal, try to look around and try to sort of understand what happened right before the meltdown to see, okay, did someone's shopping cart bang and it frightened them and their nervous system response scared them? Or did someone accidentally blast music in their car as they drove by, or honk a horn? Like, what exactly triggered the response? And start to understand that it's also not something you can fix, and it's not something people should try to fix, because it's part of their innate personality. It's a trait. It's not a physiological disorder that you can just pop a pill or put a Band-Aid on and make it go away. And it's,
Yeah.
it's not something that people should grow up thinking that they need to put it away. Like my coworker tried for ages to desensitize herself and act normal and try to have normal responses to things. And at one point I remember telling her, your husband's lack of empathy doesn't mean that your amount of empathy is wrong or bad.
Right.
You just have different levels. You have different triggers and you have different depths and different understandings. It doesn't mean he's wrong and it doesn't mean you're wrong, but it would help if he understood, hey, well, you may not see this as a big deal. To me, it's like world ending. And just have that communication and try to understand the triggers and what exactly the emotions are. And that can be hard for you to identify as an HSP. Why am I feeling this way? And then what triggered it? So my therapist taught me a good tool called anchoring, where you stop and you think, okay, how am I feeling? And you can write it down. You can go over it in your head and just look at the emotions and analyze the emotions. Okay, this is how I'm feeling. And then look at, okay, why am I feeling that way? What triggered it? What started this? Was it something someone said? Or was it something external? And then you can like stop there, have that analysis going, and then move on and come back to it later. Like maybe when the conversation's over, before you write that angry email that is oh so tempting to hit send on. And that's a good starting point. I think, at least for me, it's helped me cope as well. Identify the emotion and the trigger.
It's also important in coping with HSP, and really some of the coping elements have nothing to do with, really, if you want to put them into a good list of how you take care of yourself. If you are a highly sensitive person, self-care is important. And
It's number
really
one.
the self-care elements it's not a bad list for everybody.
Mhm.
What are some of the things on there? I saw what went on behind you, by the way.
This is my life. They destroy my house and then I put it back together so they
Yeah.
can destroy it again.
Yeah, that's good.
It's so much fun.
That's probably a coping mechanism for you, isn't it?
Mhm. And for them. Here's something you can knock over and knock off the table. Oh, that
Yeah.
was therapeutic. Go ahead, do it again.
Go ahead, do it again. What are some of those self-care elements?
So for a lot of HSPs, I think it's, if you're noticing someone's HSP and they're getting overwhelmed, encourage them to find a quiet space and maybe some alone time to just decompress. Encourage decompression. If their way of decompressing is gaming, then just set aside some time for them to game. If it's reading, maybe encourage them to pick up their favorite book and just find a quiet place to read. If you're an HSP, I think, you'll probably know your coping mechanisms more. It could be a nap. It could be just laying down. It could be going out and shopping. It could even be going out to drinks with friends if you're an extrovert, but just having that way to decompress and knowing your limits, recognizing when you're hitting your limits and getting ahead of it to have that self-care time before you have a meltdown is really important.
All of those are it's good advice for all of us, really. And it brings up one last thing that I just want to mention, and it's not to throw water on any of this, but we also have to be careful with any personality trait, with any condition, that we don't use something that is a part of who we are as an excuse either, right? There are still choices. There are still opportunities to find coping mechanisms and to utilize resources rather than just say, I can't do that because, and use it as a reason to not function or to exhibit bad behavior when we do have control, when we do have choices.
And it's important too to not see it as a weakness. If you can start seeing these traits in yourself or in other people that you know are HSPs, help them find ways to use it to their advantage. If someone is very sound sensitive, maybe consider having them, like, I don't know. I mean, my dad is sound sensitive. He's blind, but he loves like recording and editing and stuff like that. So he can notice things that other people don't. So maybe try to use that to their advantage. Or, if they don't love bright spaces, maybe they can help out, help other people, like maybe children's classrooms, if there are children's classrooms nearby that have special needs, help identify those needs and identify ways that you can help in the classroom, like help design classrooms. I mean, a friend of mine did that. She went to the elementary school and said, hey, here's a special needs room. Every kid is different, but these kids seem to be triggered by, for example, this light switch. So let's find a way to mitigate that. Let's try a way to fix it, not in a way that would disturb the other kids, but just trying to make life a little bit easier on them. And then same for yourself. If you're an HSP and you find you're overwhelmed in certain work situations that are unavoidable, maybe talking to a therapist and talking to close friends and family and saying, hey, this is what I'm dealing with. This is what I feel in these situations. What would you recommend I try to not have such a strong reaction in these situations? Or if you have these strong reactions, how can I cope with them? One of the ways is to just let those emotions go. Just feel them. Don't try to push them off. Don't try to ignore them. Don't try to stop them. Just let the feels come. If your neurological system is freaking out because someone's chewing gum and it's making you sweat, just sweat it out. Don't punch them in the face. Just sweat it out, let it go, and try to deep breathe through it. But especially talking to a therapist or counselor, I think if you're in unavoidable situations, they can help you find tools to make those situations more palatable and more doable.
That's all good advice. So too often, I think we avoid opportunities to converse with, to spend time with a therapist or someone else in a professional capacity who also lives outside our personal bubble and can maybe speak into things and help us work through things a little more objectively. And sometimes within it's good. I think it's good for family members to be aware and to be self-aware, but it also helps to have people who aren't in the same fishbowl.
Yep. And that's one of the great things about being an HSP too, is you, unlike an empath where they absorb the emotions of those around them and they have no choice, they just take on all those emotions.
Yeah.
An HSP can look at someone and recognize, oh, you're feeling this way, or they're agitated. Whereas some people are like, no, they look fine. And you're like, that's not just RBF. There's something going on there. And you can really make a huge difference in someone's life. Even at the grocery store, if you notice someone's overwhelmed standing in line, if you just maybe talk to them or make a joke and try to loosen the tension, because you're an HSP, you can see things that other people don't. And you really have a lot more opportunities to actually help the people around you and help make the world a better place, which I think is probably the biggest strength. Even though it can be really hard, I think it's a huge strength to have in your tool belt that not everyone has. There's at least 80% of the population that doesn't have that capability. And just seeing what one act of kindness can do is really amazing.
Makes a huge difference. Hey, I'm going to share a couple of things here as we close out. First of all, thank you for bringing this topic. Thank you for sharing so much great information. And if we can, I don't know if you have time to look up the name and where the documentary is available, and we can put that in the chat if we have that. If not, we'll make sure that we add that after the show, and the book and the documentary will both be on my Facebook page afterward as well. But yeah, if we can, we just want to make sure that we're helping to share some of these things. Kim, thank you. Before we finish today, I want to share some things that are coming up in the next 2 or 3 weeks here on Coffee Breaks with Steve. First of all, next week is going to be fun. We're actually in preparation to do this. Get Remy and Jameson sat down in one place long enough to have a conversation and to relive some things. 2 years ago, over 2 years ago now, Carol and I took these two boys on a trip to the East Coast, 2-week-long trip to the East Coast. That was sort of a fun trip, but it was also a history trip and a personal history trip, because we visited some places where their Revolutionary War ancestors lived and even fought during the Revolutionary War. And they had an opportunity to experience a variety of things that were tied to that period in history, as well as some history since. And as we come up next week, we're just going to be a few days away from the 4th of July and our celebration of Independence Day. And we're going to have a conversation with Remy and Jameson to have them share a little bit about the experience that they had visiting some of the locations, learning some things about the founding of our country and learning some things about their own personal ancestry and history. So that's going to be a lot of fun. And then a couple of weeks out, Shalann's going to be on the show. She just recently had an opportunity to visit New York for about a week and a half with some specific goals in mind. She was there for most of that time with her sister-in-law, Adele, who is an actor, performer, dancer, singer, and Shalane is also an actor and performer. And they were both going to New York for some events that were taking place, but also to look into some things from a performer's perspective, look at some workshops, etc. Things don't always go as planned. And Shalane's going to be here to share some of her adventures and misadventures. I think they're all a lot of fun and positive, but also not necessarily atypical for Shalane and her sharing of it. What's that?
As a directionally challenged person, I can relate.
Yeah, it's going to be great. And the only thing that we're trying to do now is figure out how to pare it down so it fits into one Coffee Breaks with Steve episode.
Two-parter.
We may have to do a two-parter on that. But then 3 weeks out, I'm going to introduce you all to a new friend of mine by the name of Jazz Azari, who spent most of her career. First of all, that's just a great name. Regardless of what your profession is, that's a great name. But Jazz worked for a number of years in federal government, working in the State Department and related government agencies, does consulting work now around some of that expertise, but through different elements of her life was inspired to begin writing fantasy novels and has already written 2 books that have been published that I have, and I'm now in the process of reading and becoming familiar with. And one of the books is the first in what will be a series around the same characters and around the same land. And we're going to have Jazz on here to talk about her books, to talk about what inspires her and how her interesting career has led to some interesting creativity in writing these books. Also, just always want to throw out, just like Kim came up with some great topics so far, and she'll be back and we'll have more topics together. But if you have ideas about topics that you would like to see us discuss on Coffee Breaks with Steve, or even you think that it would be appropriate for you to come on and join and talk about some topics as a guest or a co-host, let's discuss that. Maybe you got some ideas about guests who should be joining us on the show, particularly if it's somebody you know and can make an introduction to. I love it when people say, you should have Oprah on the show. You should have, somebody famous on the show. And I go, great. Do you know them? Do you know how to get past their gatekeepers? Do you know how to contact them? But we've had some people on this show, I've been surprised, who have responded to my cold outreaches and saying, hi, I do this thing. Would you like to be on the show? And they go, sure. So we never know. But if you've got ideas about topics or guests, let me know about them. You can put them in a private message to me if we're Facebook friends, and many of you are friends on Facebook or in other places. Call me up if you got my phone number. But if nothing else, send them to cbwsteve@comcast.net, because we love to know that you're involved in this. This is your virtual coffee table. We're all involved in the conversation. And then a final reminder, if you're already subscribed to the Coffee Breaks with Steve YouTube channel, thank you so much. If you are not yet subscribed, go there after the show ends today and subscribe to our channel. And go and look at, it's easiest to participate live in the chat here on Facebook, where most of you are watching. But you can go in and see on YouTube as well as on Facebook the recorded versions of the show. You can watch the videos, you can make comments, you can like them. And when you do that, it raises the profile of those. The other thing you can do is share that YouTube channel with your friends, with your colleagues, with the people in your network and circle, because can you imagine, again, maybe there were a bunch of people out there who should be hearing what we talked about today about highly sensitive persons, who should know about that book, who should hear what Kim has to share about her own experiences. We have other great guests on here. We have great topics all the time. So please share that YouTube channel, because that's also going to affect the algorithm. And then all of a sudden, when people are searching for something interesting, Coffee Breaks with Steve pops up. I'm not looking for fame and fortune, but I think we have some great topics and some great guests, and I would love for more people to be able to experience what we've got here. Kim, any last thoughts as we wrap things up today?
Well, Shalane said my cats should be guests, or they could be guests, and it's very true. I mean,
We could do an
they have
entire show
trauma.
just around that.
Yeah, and that
Yeah.
was Cholula. I mean, we've got 3 out of 6. So
Well, and it would be like herding cats, which could actually be relevant to this show and how it often goes.
during a
because,
tornado warning, it's especially difficult.
it's-
They have
Are
no
you-
sense of self-preservation.
Are you having any of those right now?
No.
Okay, good. That's
Fingers
good.
crossed.
Kim Baker, once again, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for sharing as you continue to do so many interesting topics. Looking forward to having you back again soon.
Thanks.
All
This is
right. And for everybody out there, remember that we all have a voice. We all have hands and feet in some fashion. Maybe physically we have limitations, but we all have ways that we can reach out, that we can be ambassadors, that we can be advocates for the things about which we are most passionate. And for all of us, please find a way to make a difference in your world this week. God bless you. Have a great week. We'll see you next time.